what is critical race theory. People don't know how to define it. People have different definitions, and people are making this conversation, especially in our circles, all about this issue. So I would like to know from you guys, what is critical race theory and how much do you agree or disagree with?
Papo?
I appreciate that. So critical race theory. I'm gonna try to break it down as simply as I can. I think first, to understand critical race theory, you need to understand what critical theory is. Critical theory is a social tool. It is not a biblical tool. So if we're taking CRT to try to apply it to the Bible, I don't think that's biblical at all. But I think critical theory as a social tool is generally asking, in regards to a context, in regards to history, you're asking three basic questions. What happened? Who was affected? And was there any injustice or oppression that happened? I think critical theory just does that. You can apply it to any context you want to, whether Cuban Revolution, whatever you want to do in regards to slavery in America, or even to any topic that we have today. So again, critical theory is just simply a social tool to understand what's going on. When you add the aspect of racism into critical race theory, you're not asking those questions through the lens of race. How has racism affected the church? Who was affected? Who was impressed? What was injustice? All that stuff. So I think as you think through those things in regards to critical race theory, I think, again, it's not a biblical tool to understand the Bible, but I think it's a good tool to kind of understand what's happened or kind of explain or reveal what's going on. And so for me, when I think of critical race theory, I am not 100% aligned with it. I want to make sure that's very clear. As I'm learning this Presbyterian lingo, you eat the meat and spit out the bone. As I'm learning that more and more, I think there's some things with critical race theory that I would agree with. But people do wrestle with, and I'll make this short so everyone can talk about it. But there's four main avenues that some people who are CRT supporters think about when they think about CRT. First is that we all live in a racism world. Everyone's racist. That's a clear advocate to some extent of what CRT is. Everyone's racist. We live in a racism world. I don't know. I fully agree with that. I think some people will navigate that waters in regards to different opinions, but I don't know if I agree with that fully. But I do see how people live in that mindset that the whole world is racist and people are out for them because of skin tone. Two, this convergent theory that regards that all white people, and I'm using that particularly, I'm not trying to single everyone out because you can apply this to every and different races. So please understand that. But I'm just doing a context of CRT in America right now, that all white people, because they're racist, they can't be saved because of their sin. And I don't agree with that. I think the gospel, as Romans 1:16 says, is powerful enough to redeem people who are racist. I've met people who have been hardcore racist, even to the point that you can borderline call them KKK members, redeemed by the gospel, repenting. So I don't agree with that people who are racist are impossible of redemption or salvation. I disagree with that tremendously. They also have a concept of anti-liberalism. I really kind of fully understand that, so if anyone knows that more than I do, I'll love you to flesh that out. The one of CRT that I kind of understand is that knowledge can be a social construct. And what they mean by that with CRT is that sometimes knowledge is only given through one person's perspective. Now, if you're in seminary where there's LAMP, Southern, I went to Southeastern, I'm at LAMP right now, like when I go to the materials, I pull the books off my shelf or I order the books that I have to use for class, a lot of them come from white theologians. A lot of them come from white male theologians that may never had a context of different races or sometimes own slaves. And so sometimes the knowledge or the experience, education that some people are receiving come from a slanted or a particular view that I don't think includes a lot of different races understanding. Like for me, a big pioneer in my own faith right now is Justo Gonzalez. And I hate that sometimes his material or his lectures are not really promoted for people to kind of understand. And so I think personally, I can see, and I would agree to some extent, that sometimes an aspect of CRT is that knowledge is a social construct. So again, CRT, it is not a biblical tool. It is a good tool to kind of understand racism, has affected different churches throughout the world, whether it's Cuba and whatever. So that's my thought. Love to get your guys' opinions. I know this is the one that a lot of people are going to fight about, and I feel like there's about to be more combat. So this is going to be dope. Have fun. Make good choices.
Aldo, Joel,
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, the CRT. Yeah, it's historically it's an offshoot of critical legal studies, which promoted postmodern legal theory. So its supporters rejected the claim that American law is neutral, fair, and impartial. So they argued that the rule of law in America can be narrowed down into one basic feature or theme: as an instrument of social, economic, and political domination by society's most powerful social cultural group to further their rights and their interests. So the proponents of CRT piggybacked, okay, on critical legal studies. And they used this academic framework, and then they used it by declaring that structurally racism and white supremacy are central to the law and the policy of the United States, and are racism and white supremacy are part of the structure of legal institutions to oppress and marginalize Blacks and other minority groups. CRT seeks ways to change that structure. So it's not only a legal philosophy, but it's a political activist approach. For them, race is deterministic, right? All events are determined by race. And race is a product of social forces and social structures. And that's what Karl Marx believed in, okay? Presently, and that was his anthropology, you know, that a human being is a product of social forces and social structures. So presently, CRT racial thought has influenced other academic disciplines, okay? One of the pastoral concerns I have with CRT, and I'll give an example, is Tim Keller last year wrote 4 articles about race, social issues, and social justice. And Keller raised this important question. He asked, so how do believers who understand the differences between biblical justice and the secular theories of justice actually take part in efforts against injustice in our society? So as one of the responses to this question, Keller says that believers can take part in efforts against injustice in our society with informed listening, okay? So this, he says, is based on the Reformed doctrine view of common grace. And I quote him here, and quote, despite the antithetical nature of human worldviews, we can and need to learn from non-believers. The doctrine of sin means we Christians are not as wise as our right worldview should make us. The doctrine of common grace means non-believers are not as unwise as their wrong worldview should make them. But we should be informed in our listening, careful to not adopt their worldview. So he's right in saying this. Keller in the next breath says, in the next sentence he writes, it is often asked, is it possible for a Christian to reject CRT as a worldview but still use it as a tool, as an analytical tool, a social tool? So Keller is right on the money when he responds by saying that, quote, on the one hand, CRT can't be used merely as a tool apart from its worldview assumptions, because the underlying worldview in many ways is the tool. And he adds by way of footnote, he says here, I'm not here arguing that critical race theory is a comprehensive worldview. Like most schools of thought, it is a mishmash of somewhat disparate elements. Nevertheless, all schools of thought are grounded in the underlying assumptions about the nature of reality. For example, they must assume particular views of human nature. Is it spiritual or only physical? Sinful or good, or a blank state? Shaped by individual choice or by society? While CRT is not a full worldview, it does not work from a biblical anthropology. And he goes on to add that CRT sees all racial disparities and inequalities as due to structural factors. Like all non-Christian theories, it is reductionistic. That is its fatal weakness, that it is deterministic, it is reductionistic.
So,
But
Joel,
wait for it.
okay, dale.
Yeah. So, but wait for it. Keller then throws us a curveball. He says, quote, but it can also be a strength, CRT, as a tool. How so? Well, he says there's an old saying, if your only tool is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. CRT will think that many things are nails, that is systemic, structural injustice that are not. However, it will not likely miss any real nails. And since our biblical worldview does understand that there is corporate responsibility and structural injustice, then CRT thinkers may show Christians some things that our own sin and cultural blinders have missed, but it can also be a strength, right?
And I think that's what's needed. That's what I think the tool should be used for.
Yeah.
Again, my worldview comes from a Reformed theological worldview. So
Yeah.
I think, again, the tool is to be good. Again, like I said, there's things in CRT I do not agree with all. And there's things with CRT that I don't think is a biblical worldview. But I think if we use some of the tools it has, it reveals some things I think would be healthy dialogue for our church to kind of understand racism in our context and outside of our context.
And
Yeah.
Let me follow up on that because this is important. Keller
Joe,
thinks that
if you mind,
because of the doctrine of common grace,
Joe,
it allows us to learn.
Joe.
It allows us. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
since you've talked the longest, I'm going to let Aldo have the opportunity to respond, since you opened it up with them.
Okay. Yeah. So just to try to be succinct, the thing about like critical race theory, it's a concept that is attached to an ideology and a worldview.
Correct.
So you can't separate concepts with the worldview they're in.
Why not?
Well, because when Paul sees people try to incorporate asceticism concepts, he doesn't say, well, just baptize asceticism and Christological thinking and make the most of it. He says, look, all these things that are not based upon the worldview of Christ, they have an appearance of wisdom, but they have no value against curbing the flesh. So when Paul, listen, let me give you an example of this. Paul, the elephant in the room of Romans is partiality. Jew and Gentiles think they're better than each other. And Paul shows us that the Adamic issues that every image bearer has are sufficient to diagnose the problem of what's wrong with men and also to deliver men. Paul does not ever baptize worldly concepts from pagan worldviews to be useful. He says, listen, my worldview is the cross of Christ, and my understanding is creation, fall, redemption, and consummation. And that narrative is all sufficient to deal with man's deepest issues with each other and to provide man's deepest solutions. And so, the idea that, let me just put it this way. The idea that we, the church, need pagan worldviews that have nothing to do with God, Christ, or the church to be useful, it is naive. And let me just say this, I'll close with this thought and leave it. You can't chew out the meat and spit out the bones. Let me tell you why. When you drink ocean water, you can't say spit out the salt of the ocean water, because the ocean water is so permeated with the substance that they're inseparable. So when you digest concepts that are entrenched in godless ideologies that are counter to our biblical theology, you can't spit it out because it comes entrenched. So
Yeah, but I mean, even in if you're going to use biblical theology, I mean, you look at somebody like Voss, right? And I mean, he was critiqued heavily because he got his ideas almost off of Gabler, right? And so people critiqued him as well. They basically said, well, his theology was born under a dark star, and therefore we should reject biblical theology because it has origins in liberal theology. The same Paul that you're quoting is the Paul who also quotes from philosophers who totally have a different worldview, but he changes the reference point, in Acts 17.
Acts 17.
So I mean, the fact that he can do that and put the right reference point. I mean, if anything, and let me just say right off the bat, I've never read anything from CRT. The only thing I've read that the same articles that Joel referenced. That's about my deepest experience reading about CRT. I've never read anything about it. And I mean, in a sense, I'm in agreement with you, Aldo, in the point that we do have in sufficient standards, within ourselves. I mean, you look at Westminster Larger Catechism 135, 136. We have all the things that tell us there what we need to do.
Yeah.
But here's something. And I guess this would kind of be the historical question, because the fact that we're still dealing with it in the church says that we haven't used our tools. And so the thing is here comes somebody else along that says basically, and I almost take this as judgment on the church. If you're not going to do it, then something else is going to come in.
And the issue with the philosophers is that why is it that we can chew the cud and spit out the seeds?
Hey, Chris. By the way, I'm going to allow you to make the last comment, and then we'll move on to our next question. Okay?
Bruh.
Sorry, Pablo. Sorry. Just wait.
After Chris, let me say one minute after Chris.
Okay. So how about this, Chris? You got 1 minute, Bappa 1 minute, and then we'll move on. Okay.
Okay.
Good deal.
Philosophy is rightly called the handmaiden of theology. We borrow analytical tools from philosophy for our hermeneutical principles. We borrow rhetorical principles for our homiletical principles. Systematic theology wouldn't exist without philosophy. So why is it that we can do that in respect to philosophy, which is attached to worldviews, but we take this position in respect to CRT?
He gave it to Bappo.
I think
he gave it to Bappo, man.
Go ahead, Bappo. My bad.
So my thing about one thing I always say with CRT, I think again I'm still mixed on it. I think it's still healthiness with it, and some things you got to spit out. I agree with that. But I think the reality is sometimes we have seen historically through Christianity that people have come with this book, come on authoritative to address some racist issues. They want to use Romans or Galatians or Old Testament text, and some churches still choose to reject it. So after centuries or generations of people rejecting it, with the authority of God's word, they're coming like, I need to use something that's secular to kind of address the element of growth. Example for me, and I'll close, is Dr. King. Dr. King was in jail. He penned a letter from Birmingham jail. And the reason for it is him to address Southern Baptist preachers or Baptist preachers in general who are not speaking out about the racial issues that are happening in the South. And so, again, I think CRT is a good, healthy tool. Not all of it, not the worldview, but I think we use it through the worldview of Christianity. It can be good to kind of expose something and have healthy dialogue with our church.